We have solved the truth, we have felt the pain, even wandered beyond our faith in the name. We cannot pretend we are always okay. We cannot depend on fast food grace. And help me let you go, help me give up control of the God I have made you when my fear has contained you. Help me let you go, help me give up control of the God I have made you when my fear has contained you. When the way is unclear and the answer's elusive, it is different by far than our broken conclusions. You are not the God my pain has conceived. You are deeper and stronger than my eyes can see. Help me let you go, help me give up control of the God I have made you when my fear has contained you. Help me let you go, help me give up control of the God I have made you when my fear has contained you. You are with us now, you have always been. When we're found without, you are found within. And help me let you go, help me give up control of the God I have made you when my fear has contained you. Help me let you go, help me give up control of the God I have made you when my fear has contained you.
Hey everyone, Greta here, and I have some announcements for us today. First of all, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has participated in our Pride Week celebration event that we've been doing over the last week. It was so cool to just hear stories and see people tune in for the Q and Zoom discussions and just uplift the voices of our LGBTQ friends. So thank you for joining us in that, and we hope to continue to do things like that in the future. Next, I want to tell you about our Fill the Truck this week. On Wednesday, we're going to be doing a supply drive for the Navajo Nation, and our Fill the Truck is going to be outside of our office from noon to 1 o'clock this Wednesday. So make sure you check out our website or our social medias for the full list of supplies that we are collecting for the Navajo Nation. Also, our children's ministry is going to be delivering packages this week, so keep your eyes out for that if you've got kiddos and if you signed up. If you did not sign up with Tanner for the children's ministry delivery, but you're interested in that, make sure you email her at tanner@flagstaffcommons.com. Last announcement, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our youth ministry. We have a really wonderful partnership with the Episcopal Church in town over at Epiphany, and we have a youth co-op called the Flagstaff Youth Co-op, and we are currently in need of more youth ministry leaders. So this is for middle school and high school students. So if that's something that you might be interested in, just hanging out with high school or middle school students and getting to know them and being a friend and listening and getting to kind of be a mentor to them in some ways, we would love to talk to you about that. It's a fun thing. They have fun events and games, and these kids are so awesome, and we'd love to talk to you about it. So if you have any interest in being a youth leader, please reach out to me. My email is Greta, Gretta, at flagstaffcommons.com, and we want to make sure that we set up our team well going into the fall. So please let me know if you're interested in youth ministry. Thanks for listening.
Hey Commons family, and welcome again to our online service. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. We always, whether we're meeting together in person or doing this digitally, we always pray for other churches in town, or at least most of the time, unless there's a special thing going on, because we love praying for our siblings around this town in the faith and all the diverse expressions. And so today, we're going to pray for Shepherd of the Hills Lutheran Church. And many of you who go to the Commons remember that we have a special kindness for them. They opened their doors to us when we were between buildings after we left the downtown church and moved. So we love Pastor Adam and all those, our family that meet at Shepherd of the Hills. So if you're the praying type, join me and we're going to lift them up today. God, thanks so much for, as always, this technology and medium where we can connect, especially as we pray, we connect to you and trust that you bind us together, especially with all of our diverse siblings around the world and in our town. And today we're thinking of and praying in solidarity with Shepherd of the Hills Lutheran Church. Thanks for Adam and his family and their leadership. And I just pray, as always, that we'll all draw closer to you and to each other. And we pray today also, as always, that you would open up our hearts and minds for what you might have for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I really hope, I've been in Texas and then I've come back and I'm actually headed out to Texas again and I'll be back again, but I really hope you have enjoyed our new series on mental health in the faith. I'm so thankful for my wife Marka sharing. I'm so thankful for Melissa Dose sharing. I know they did a great job. I'm so thankful for them sharing their expertise, and I hope it's been a great resource for you. But this is our final week of our series and discussion on mental health and faith. And today I'm just here to give an introduction, and it's a fun one for me to give because it's a good friend of mine. I get to introduce to you Dr. Cody Bayless. And Cody is a friend. In fact, he has deep roots with the Commons. He and Jamie were on our leadership team at the Commons, and we love them and their two daughters. And Cody is a PhD psychologist here with a practice here in town. He's brilliant, and I can't wait for you to hear about what he has to say about mental health and the faith. So enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. I honestly have no idea what Charlie said about me, so I thought I'd give another quick introduction to myself. So my name is Cody Bayless. I was born here, raised here in Flagstaff. I earned my master's degree and then my PhD from NAU, commonly referred to as Harvard of the West. While I was in school and then after school, I worked 9 years in community mental health. A lot of that as a substance abuse counselor and then doing some clinical administration. And then roughly 2.5 years ago, joined Flagstaff Counseling Center as a partner. And right before this whole global pandemic thing, a friend of mine, Dr. Dan Phillips, and we started a wellness collective. It's called Beyond the Pines, and part of that, we're doing a podcast called Beyond Flag, which we're sitting down with people from around town, asking about their life, their craft, their expertise, whatever it might be, their connection to Flagstaff, just to create familiarity. Another part of that is that we do episodes that are called Quick and Nerdies, and we just do like 25-30 minutes on topics related to well-being, psychology. We did one on neuroplasticity. We did another one on emotions. And we just finished a 2-part series on toxic masculinity. And this summer, we'll be doing one on mindfulness. So if you have any interest, tune in there. Part of what Dan and I want to do with Beyond the Pines is related to our core values, which are connection to self, connection to others, and connection to the natural world. And that's what I want to talk with you all about today, is how these connections are related to mental health and well-being. And before I go much further, I just want to do a quick disclaimer that there's no way that I can cover all 3 of those things in 15 to 20 minutes, let alone one of them. So I'm just going to try and provide a quick overview on those. Before I go further, I just want to ask a few questions. just want you to think of a time in your life where maybe you didn't feel too well from a mental standpoint. Maybe you felt a little bit depressed, maybe you felt a little bit anxious, agitated, or irritated. And then just some questions about that. Just want you to think, who are you with? Were you alone? Or were you with a group of people that you like, that you enjoy to be around? Where were you? Were you in your house? Were you in your room? Were you on your couch? Or were you out and about? Were you moving throughout the town? Were you moving throughout the natural world? Another question to ask is, what were you doing? Were you watching the tube? Were you scrolling through Instagram? Were you drinking or drugging? Or were you doing meaningful work connected to your values and the things that you enjoy in life? If I had to take a guess, or if I had to take it to Vegas and bet on it, I'd probably say that in one way or another, you felt disconnected from yourself. Maybe you felt disconnected from your values. Maybe you felt disconnected from your body, your work, your craft. Maybe disconnected from other people or from the natural world, just not getting out, being intentional about spending time outside, moving outside, or resting outside. And so again, you're going to hear me use this word connection a lot. And so I think it's important to first define it. And a really easy way to define connection is just to think of connection as a relationship, is that it's just a reciprocal relationship that you have with something else. So when I say connection to self, I'm talking about your relationship to yourself, others, relationship with other people, and then environment, I'm talking about your relationship to the natural world out there. Like any relationship, we can use words that describe the quality of that relationship. So like on one side of the spectrum, we might use words like cold, absent, harsh, critical, judgmental. And then we can move across the spectrum and we can use other words that would describe that relationship. And we could use words like warm, sincere, enthusiastic, exciting, engaged, anything like that. So we have quality of relationship, and ideally what we want to do is increase the quality of our relationship so that we feel better. The first thing I want to talk about is connection to self. And I was going to read just a quick verse from 1 John, chapter 3, verse 1. It just says this: "See what kind of love the Father has for us, that we should be called children of God." And that is what we are, children of God. So we can stop there, just pause and reflect on that notion. And just start with the idea that I am a child of God, that you are a child of God. And if we're descendants of God, God is within me and God is within you. So I want to talk a little bit about how that informs our approach to ourself. In a lot of mindfulness-based therapies, we talk about how our approach defines our experience a lot of times. In therapy, I use this riddle or this metaphor a lot, and I'll say, imagine two people go to the Grand Canyon and they approach the canyon at the same time. They look at the same walls, the same sun, the same clouds in the sky. They're there for the same amount of time. They leave at the same amount, or they leave at the same time. One leaves unimpressed and the other leaves impressed. What's different? And so we talk about how the approach to that situation will define their experience. Maybe the person who's unimpressed had expectations that the canyon was going to look a certain way. There'd be less tourists. Maybe the weather would feel different. Or maybe they just go hoping to leave soon, and all they want to do is just capture the photo. They might even look at the Grand Canyon and say, oh, it's a big ditch in the ground. If so, that's probably going to be what your experience is like. It's probably not going to be all that meaningful. For the person who approaches the Grand Canyon and leaves with a meaningful experience, they might approach it with curiosity, appreciation, or wonder for the geological history behind it. They might see what they can notice about it, and then they leave with a sense of satisfaction or a sense of meaningfulness. So if we take that concept that our approach defines our experience, the thing I would look at is, how does your approach to your relationship with yourself define how you feel about yourself? And so the first thing I want to look at is, let's just look at the way we talk to ourselves. I know Marka mentioned this in hers a little bit, but do we use language that would reflect that we talk to ourselves like we're a child of God? Would you use the same language to a child that you use toward yourself? Does your self-talk reflect openness? Does it reflect warmth, love, care, compassion, anything like that? Or does it reflect more of a critical tone? Is it harsh? Is it cold? Is it judgmental? If so, the question I would ask is, where did you learn that? What experiences in life inform that harsh, critical voice that we believe that that is true? Did we learn that from a parent, mother, father? Did we learn that from a sibling? Maybe a school teacher? Or I always like to highlight, do we learn that from our society? An unfair system that tells you that you ought to look a certain way or do a certain thing to feel a certain way about yourself. A really annoying feature about our mind is that we often rely on our intuitions to know what's best for us. So let's take that concept that we rely on our intuitions that says we know what's best for us, we know how we're going to be happy. So if we put that in the context of American society, what does that look like for us? It says that you have to look a certain way, you have to do a certain thing to feel happy or connected to yourself. That by getting the degree or getting the house or getting the truck, whatever it might be, that those are going to be the things that make you feel happy or connected to yourself. Well, what does the data say about this? This one's right on the surface. It's not that hard. We know that that's not going to have any sort of meaningful, lasting effect. And the data tells us that we typically get an initial bump of happiness, a really tiny one, and then it typically goes away around 5 to 7 days later. So why is that? So we find ourselves kind of stuck in this pattern of seeking the next thing so that we can maintain that short bump. Like on a graph, it just looks like a little peak and it dips. So why is that? And so I was going to introduce you to this concept called Hedonic Adaptation. And essentially what that means is that we just get used to stuff. Our brains are wired to adapt. Imagine if they never did. We'd be in a constant state of wondering whether we're safe or whether we're okay. So our brains naturally adapt to things. They naturally adapt to the environment. So what that means in the context of society is that if we continue to chase things to make us feel good about ourselves, we just get new stuff and then we get used to it. It no longer has that novel effect. So what are some things that do have a positive effect on our relationship to ourselves? There are a bunch. I just want to share with you a couple things. I'm sure you've heard this before, but the first thing I always say is start with your biology. Diet, sleep, and exercise. If you want to take care of yourself, you want to take care of your biology. Imagine life as it is. It's already pretty difficult. And then when we start sleeping 4 hours a night, how much more difficult life feels. How good do we feel when we start eating and really poorly over an extended period of time? And what is it like when we live a sedentary lifestyle, one where we're not moving, versus a lifestyle where we are moving? We typically just don't feel as well. So we can always start with our biology, and then by engaging in these behaviors that show us we care about ourselves. So if we eat well, we're showing ourselves we care about our health. We sleep well, we're showing ourselves the same thing. And if we exercise, we're showing ourselves the same thing. That essentially we send ourselves a message through our behavior that we care about ourselves. So one, you want to feel better? Start with your biology. The second thing I'll look at is just clarify the things that matter in life and then act intentionally on those things. Again, our behavior sends us a message subconsciously. So when you know what matters and you do those things, you're showing yourself that you're connected, that you're engaged to what matters. So for instance, for me, creativity, mindfulness, compassion, humor, joy, adventure, I would say those are all things that fall within my values. And I can practice those no matter what the context is. Global pandemic, I can still be mindful, can still be creative, can still be humorous. Any other type of situation in life, those values always exist. So no matter what the weather is, you can always follow your values as long as you know what direction is true north. When you go true north, we tend to feel better. And the last thing I would say is check in on your self-talk. Again, ask yourself, is the way that I talk to myself the same way that I would talk to a child of God? If so, continue doing that. If not, let's step back and let's look at if there's a better, more helpful way to talk to ourselves. So next I want to talk to you about connection to others. First thing we covered there was that connection or relationship to ourselves. Next I want to talk about that connection or relationship to other people and how that can also help our well-being. John 15:12 says this, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you." From birth, our brains wire themselves to their physical and social environments. There's a massive amount of literature out there about child and caregiver attachment bond that shows that the quality of that relationship can predict medical, physical, social outcomes. And so at a very young age, as soon as we come out of the womb, we begin wiring ourselves for relationship. And it's through relationship that we often learn the most about ourselves. And this is the very premise of interpersonal neurobiology. Just the idea that we grow into the best versions of ourselves through relationship with other people. If there were no other people on this planet, we'd have zero feedback. We don't know what's good. We don't know what's wrong. It's through relationship that we get feedback on who we are. Quick comment on a little sidebar on American culture as it relates to this is our culture and our society has become increasingly individualistic. So again, we tend to celebrate individual accomplishments. We celebrate autonomy, We celebrate the individual, not the team. We celebrate the principal author, not the group of authors, that kind of thing. And that's very different than a lot of other cultures that are considered collectivistic. So a lot of Asian cultures, Latino, Latina, Latinx cultures are very collectivistic. And one of my favorite studies, a group of researchers would show a picture of an individual speaking to a crowd. And they showed this picture to a group of Americans, and they'd say, "What do you see?" And the group of Americans would consistently say, "I see a person talking to a crowd of people." And then they would show the same picture to a group of Asian tourists, and they would ask the same question, "What do you see?" And they would say, "I see a crowd of people listening to somebody." And so what they could collect from that essentially was that our tendency or our default is to highlight the individual, and we start with that. Now, something that by doing so is that we've kind of dismantled our tribes in a lot of ways. We've dismantled our connection for others by placing a premium on individual accomplishment and individualism. I don't want to say that that's all bad, but it does have an effect. So individualism and then virtual connection, something that we've learned, doesn't have quite the effect as human to human or face-to-face contact. And there's not this positive of a biological effect that we receive through that. So for instance, right now, we're going to be missing out on the neurochemical called oxytocin. So through face-to-face contact, if you and I were having the same conversation on a park bench, our brains would be releasing this neurochemical called oxytocin, which is referred to as the cuddle hormone. So what that does is it actively acts against stress hormones. So with people who have higher levels of oxytocin tend to have lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of depression. And we could switch that. People with lower levels of oxytocin have higher levels of anxiety and higher levels of depression. And we can sort of meaningfully conclude that lower oxytocin results in depression in some ways. And what that looks like is just a disconnection from other people. So our brains release this helpful chemical when we are relating and connecting with one another, and particularly through human touch. So I want to speak to depression a little bit. And we have a lot of data out there that suggests that people who feel depressed or are stuck in a cycle of sadness or in a cycle of grief tend to think a lot more about themselves when compared to other people who are not depressed. And so in our brain, there's this network that's referred to as the default mode network. It consists of areas from the posterior cingulate cortex and then areas of the medial prefrontal cortex. I won't get too nerdy, just think in the middle of your brain and then the front of your brain. And then what happens is when we're not actively paying attention to a task, our brain defaults to this network. And so this network begins to activate, it becomes more active. And thoughts that are associated with when this network activates are things like, why do I feel this way? Am I okay? It reverts to the past, thinks about how things were. Are things going to get better? Will I ever feel different than this? And so what happens is that the more that we don't focus our attention on the present moment and our default mode network becomes the default, we begin to develop this sort of egocentric type of depression where we become the center of our universe. Now, something that we know is that connection with other people gets us out of our head and gets us into that relationship with others. We're no longer, our self-talk or no longer our default mode network is as active, telling us, why do I feel this way? What's going on with me? Am I going to be all right? So what can we do to get more connected with other people? First thing I would say is just get engaged in the lives of others and allow others to integrate their lives into your story as well. Remember the words I read earlier. It says, love others. A really useful question to ask is, what does love towards others look like in action? We can talk about all this, but what does it look like when it gets applied, when it's intentionally acted on? If you really want to get connected, I'd say get with other people and rally around a cause. Have something that you're connected over that you want to change, that you want to improve. It's really hard to feel disconnected when you're with other people, serving and helping other people. Erwin McManus, who's a pastor from Church Mosaic in Los Angeles, I once heard him say, to heal, you must first serve. I don't know if that's totally true from like a psychological research standpoint, but there's something about this fact that there's a principle in that when we help other people, we tend to feel a lot better. And the last thing I wanted to read real quick, in the words of E.O. Wilson, he writes, people must belong to a tribe. Just like a bee goes haywire if it loses its hive, a human will go haywire if they lose their connection to the group. So yeah, again, remember, we're wired for relationship to other people. Speaking of E.O. Wilson, maybe a few weeks ago, I did an interview with Marka for Sage Home real quickly, in which I talked about our connection to the environment. And so if you saw that, I'm going to cover some of those same things, but I wanted to use E.O. Wilson as an example. And he talks about our connection to the environment. In 1984, E.O. Wilson wrote a book called Biophilia. And in that, he came up with what is referred to as the Biophilia Hypothesis, which is basically just the idea that we have an innate drive within us to connect and to relate with all forms of life and the natural world. And this whole idea lies on the premise of evolution, in a sense, in that we are the way we are, and we seek to connect with our physical environment because it was the exact environment that we were raised in. Essentially, we became who we are because of the environment. If we were to kind of mess with some of the elements, let's say remove oxygen, we're not going to have us. So because of that, because of how we evolved over time, we have this innate connection with, or this innate drive within us to connect. One of my favorite things to do, about a year ago, I did a talk with Citizens Climate Lobby, and I did this, is I like to show 5 pictures, nature scenes. So I'll show one with like mountains, I'll show one with water, show one with like a desert type landscape, and then like a meadow or a savanna. And then I'll show 5 photos of human environment, like freeway stacks, people walking, subways, those kinds of things. And I just ask a question. I want you to look at these photos and just notice what you feel internally when you see these photos. And so people typically will say like, I see this nature photo and I feel really compelled to go there. Like, that looks great. And so within us, the question I'd ask is, well, why is that? Why is it that we're drawn to these open nature scenes opposed to like freeway stacks and subway scenes? And so one thing with that too, that's also pretty common, is that people find themselves most drawn to the environment that represents where they grew up. And then even further is that typically humans have a preference for environments that represent the savannas of Africa, which are known to be the cradles of civilization. So within us, we have this drive to connect with nature, and not so much with freeway stacks and subways and that kind of thing. So what does this have to do? What does the relationship to our environment have to do with mental health, or have to do with well-being? I'll say a ton. First off, mood booster is what we like to call it. So there are several clinical trials out there that show people who spend even just 15 to 20 minutes a day walking in the forest tend to experience less depression when compared to other groups that didn't. There are also clinical trials that show that people who run, like in the forest or run on trails, typically have a more satisfying experience with their run when compared to other people who run on the treadmill. And the thing I would say, like, when all the other variables are accounted for, they boil this down and say, like, yeah, there's something about being outdoors that makes us feel better. So it gives us a mood boost. Next thing I would say is that it reduces our stress, it reduces our anxiety. And the last thing is that we experience an increase in cognitive performance. So we talk about all these things called executive functions, which are things like attention, focus, concentration, memory, effort, activation, like being able to get up, get going. And in clinical trials where people will spend 20 minutes in nature and then be asked to do different types of tasks that measure executive functions, they perform better when compared to people who spent 20 minutes indoors and then are asked to do the same thing. So again, we experience an increase in cognitive functioning, we experience a decrease in stress, a decrease in anxiety, and we also get a mood boost from it. And lastly, I want to go back to that idea of the ego. So I was talking in the second one about connection to others, is that we have this default mode network, and it becomes awfully egocentric or self-centric when it's activated. And something that we know about nature is that spending time outdoors allows us to step out of our own head and out into the environment. So just think of a time where, like, you were looking at the stars on like a dark night and what that felt like. Or maybe think of the time where you looked at the walls of the Grand Canyon or Havasu Falls or Yosemite or anything like this, just a range of mountains. And what it does is it tends to remind us that we're this big compared to everything else that's out there. Our entire world is constructed in that bowl of jello between our ears. It's an awfully large world in a very small space. And so what happens is when we get out there, we tend to get out of here. And then we experience essentially a space from our own ego. So again, to feel connected to the environment, we need to get out of here and get out there. So how do we get connected to the environment? The first thing I would say is just go, like get outdoors. 1, exercise outdoors. Get moving outdoors, move your body. And the second thing I would say is also get outdoors and rest. Be still. Practice mindfulness outdoors. Pay attention to what you see. Pay attention to what you hear. Pay attention to what you feel when you're outside. Those are all little strategies that can help you get connected to the outdoors. The second thing I would say is if you're parents, get your kids outdoors too. There's a lot of research that shows that kids who spend more time outdoors, 1, believe that climate change is the product of human behavior, and 2, are more likely to engage in behaviors that mitigate climate change effects. So if you're a parent, I'd say get your kids outside, get them connected to the environment as well. And quick social justice rant. I think it's in Genesis 2, talks about Adam was in the garden and was supposed to be a steward of the garden, right? And I'm not going to make that specific to Adam. I'll say that's true for you and for me. Whether you're a man, woman, non-binary, or trans, like this is true. This planet is ours and we need to take care of it. The science is pretty clear and has shown us for over the course of the last few hundred years that we collectively have produced a lot of behaviors that have created a lot of harm on our environment. And so if we're going to be stewards of the environment, we need to actively engage behaviors that protect our environment from further harm. And if you want to get connected to something, seek to help and seek to protect. And again, intentionally choose behaviors that protect the natural world from further harm. So, in conclusion, if you're not feeling well, I'd encourage you to take a pause and ask yourself a few questions. 1, am I intentionally taking care of my body? Second thing I would ask is, am I intentionally acting on the things that matter to me in my life? Am I intentionally integrating myself into the stories of others and allowing others to integrate me into their stories? Am I intentionally helping others? Am I intentionally spending time in the natural world through both movement and through rest? If the answer is no to any of these, that's okay. We don't need to go down the guilt cycle. Let's just consider that a signal. Let's just consider that's a little bit of a signal that there's some work for us to do. If the answer is no to whichever one you answered no, I would say do this. Create a plan that helps you answer yes to that question. If you answer yes to that question, it's likely that you're going to feel better. And once you have that plan, I'd say just act accordingly. Last thing I wanted to cover is this concept of neuroplasticity. And I'll just cover this real quick. It's a real deep psychological topic, neuroscience topic. But the idea is that what fires in our brain, what fires together, wires together. And so the more we think a certain way, the more we act a certain way, that becomes our default. And so it's difficult to make these changes. I'm not saying that any of these things are easy, like just make a plan and do it. I get it, that's hard. But if we make a plan, we begin to do it, we begin to unchange that network and we begin to establish a new one. So that what fires together wires together. And that becomes our new default network. So do these things repeatedly, do them often. And the more that you do them, the more that you'll feel connected. And the more that you feel connected, the more engaged and better and satisfied you'll feel in life. Thank you so much for having me, Commons family. I wish you the best.
Which way are you going? And which side will you be on? Will you stand and watch while all the seeds of hate are sown? Will you stand with those who say, let His will be done? One hand on the Bible and one hand on the gun. One hand on the Bible and one hand on the gun. Which way are you looking? And is it hard to see? Do you say what's wrong for him is not wrong for me? You walk the streets of righteousness, but you refuse to understand. You say you love the baby, then you crucify the man. You say you love the baby, then you crucify the man. Every day things are changing, words once honored turn to lies. People wondering, can you blame them? It's too far to run and too late to hide. So now you've turned your back on all the things that you used to preach. Now it's let him live in freedom if he lives like me. Where your line has changed, confusion reigns. What have you become? All your olive branches turn to spears when your flowers turn to guns. All your olive branches turn to spears when your flowers turn to guns. In the garden of our Savior, no flower grows unseen. His kindness rains like water on every humbled seed. No simple act of mercy escapes his watchful eye. For there is one who sees me. His hands are over mine. In the kingdom of the heavens, no suffering is unknown. Each tear that falls is holy. Each breaking heart a throne. There is a song of beauty in every weeping eye. For there is one who knows me. His heart it breaks with mine. Woe, their deeds forgotten, oh, the works unseen. Every drink of water flowing graciously. Every tender mercy you're making glorious. This you have asked us, do little things with great love. 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 At the table of our Savior, no mouth will go unfed, and her children in the shadows stream in and raise their heads. Oh, give us ears to hear them, and give us eyes to see. For there is one who loves them.